Joining me now is KT McFarland. You know her very well, a CPAC board member and the expert that we always consult on national security matters. She served as Deputy National Security Advisor under President Trump and also worked in the Pentagon under President Reagan. KT, thanks for joining me.
It's always a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Well, let's get right to it. This seems to be the biggest breaking news right now, where we watched North Korea test an intermediate range ballistic missile over Japan. It triggered evacuations. There's been some panic coming out of Japan. What do we make of this?
Look, North Korea is going down its checklist to have a nuclear arsenal. And what they're doing, so we know they know how to make nuclear weapons. We know that they have short-range missiles on which a nuclear weapon could be put. And now they're testing longer and longer range missiles. I assume that as they continue on, because there's nothing that's stopping them, that they will soon test an intercontinental ballistic missile. In other words, a missile capable of launching from North Korea to really anywhere in the world, even to including the United States, and carrying nuclear weapons. I don't think they're going to use those weapons, but they sure are going to use them for blackmail and bargaining purposes.
Now, President Biden did speak with the Japanese Prime Minister following this launch. They came out basically saying that they jointly condemn this missile test in the strongest of terms. As we know, it destabilizes the region and a clear violation of the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Do you think that there is a sense that what's the best way that Japan could even defend themselves against North Korea? And what's the existing tension between those two countries?
Well, Japan could defend itself in a modest way with missile defense systems. We've made some of them. We haven't made really bigger ones that would defend us against North Korean attack. But the Japanese would have some of those. The problem with Japan is it's so close to North Korea that there would be very little warning, very little ability to shoot down missiles. The other question, though, is what should we do about it? Well, strong statements, that's great, right? But what else could we do about it? And here's the real problem. China, which is responsible for keeping North Korea alive, they provide their fuel oil, their food, their economic sustenance. China doesn't want this crisis to go down. China's really happy to have a Korean peninsula bubbling up. They just don't want it to bubble over.
Right.
So they're not putting any restraints on North Korea. What might put restraints on North Korea? It would be indirectly. So let's say, for example, we encourage the Japanese to rearm, to build a strong deterrent capability, military capability. We would help the South Koreans do the same. Philippines, other countries in the region as well. What China doesn't want is for the crisis to boil over to the point where Japan rearms, where South Korea gets a more competent military, and where the Philippines and other countries in Asia do. That would get China's attention, and that would get China to say to North Korea, hey guys, you better back off. We do not want to cope with really sophisticated militaries in the South China Sea or in Asia.
So it just seems like the vice president has no idea where she's standing. Your thoughts?
Well, I've been to the demilitarized zone. I've been there several times, and it is a short. It's like a football field distance. You can see the North Koreans. You can be on the South Korean side. You can look across a no man's land, and you can see the North Koreans looking back at you. So it is you are right on the border. But for the American vice president to go and make a gaffe like that, saying we're allies of North Korea, I mean, it just sort of reinforces this notion that the Biden administration is weak, it's feckless, and they have no idea what they're doing.
Well, let me ask you, KT, as we shift gears and talking about Vladimir Putin, we saw last week that he has just been a big bully in talking about nuclear threats very openly. And then, you know, claiming this annexation of the Ukrainian territories, despite the fact that it looks like his military is abandoning him. What's your assessment so far on what you're seeing in Russia?
Okay, there are a lot of moving parts to this. One, and the most important one, is that Vladimir Putin is in a very bad place, that he's not winning this war, he's losing this war. And instead of finding an off-ramp for himself, instead of kind of pulling back, he's doubling down. So that's why he's called up 300,000 reservists, badly trained as they are, to join an already failing army. I mean, they'll be cannon fodder. The other thing he's done is he's threatened the Europeans with energy. There were the two pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and 2, that were mysteriously sabotaged last week. Well, I think it was the Russians who did it. And they blew them up because they wanted to show the Europeans, so if we're going to starve you of energy, you're going to be shivering in the dark this winter. And I think there was also a warning shot across the bow to the Europeans saying, guess what's right next to those gas pipelines? All the fiber optic cables and communications cables you have. So we could go a lot further in blackmailing Europe. The other thing that that President Putin has done is he started rattling the nuclear saber, and that gets everybody's attention. And by what he's done, though, is by saying that these 4 provinces, he's claiming them as Russian territory. He said that there was a referendum, all those people, all those citizens, they want to be part of Russia. Well, they probably didn't want to be part of Russia, but it doesn't matter. Putin is claiming them as part of Russia. And what that means is that if they are part of Russia, if Ukraine tries to move into those, to reclaim those, Putin can, under Russian terms, he can declare nuclear war for that. So all this stuff is getting really kind of terrifying. So what do we do about it? The single most important thing we could do, is to stop this war on fossil fuels, on American fossil fuels, is to have Joe Biden reverse what he did the first day in office and say, okay, we're going to let the American oil and natural gas industry pump, we're going to let them export, we're going to be the dominant energy source of the world. That way, we can supply the Europeans with energy. The Russians' blackmail is useless. That way, but the other important thing, and here's what I always look at as a Reagan person, is I want to go to economic warfare with countries because we win that one. I don't want to go to military war because who knows? The way we could really stop Vladimir Putin in his tracks is by pushing the price of oil and natural gas down. He needs those prices above $80 a barrel for oil in order to pay for this war. If the oil prices went down, he doesn't have any money in the treasury. He can't afford to pay for a war. He has to stop. And that's the most effective way to get to him and get to him quickly.
So several hours ago, it was reported on CBS News that rare video shows Russia moving equipment belonging to a nuclear weapons unit. Basically, a military analyst talked about this, saying that the video, although could not be independently confirmed, showed an armed personnel carrier with a cannon attached, as well as another vehicle belonging to the unit being transported on the train. Basically, you know, if this is the case, KT, I mean, is Putin really going to move forward with a nuclear, with basically launching a nuclear weapon?
There's 2 ways to think about this. Understand that he cannot afford an unconditional surrender. He can't afford to lose. He won't stay in power if he loses. He probably won't even stay alive if he loses. And so for him, this is an existential threat, not only to Russia, but to him. The other thing to remember is that this is probably one big game of chicken. Like Vladimir Putin saying, I'm going to threaten this, I'm going to do that, we're going to have nuclear war. And at the same time, Ukraine is saying that leaders of Ukraine are basically saying we want unconditional surrender on the part of Russia. Those are 2 places, you know, none of those are going to work. I mean, my feeling is bankrupt Russia, supply the Europeans with energy, and then tell Vladimir Putin, we can fight this war forever, but how about let's have a ceasefire now and then encourage our Ukrainian allies to go to the negotiating table, which they don't want to do. But they should go while they're ahead, they're making progress, and then settle this thing, because I'd play the long game here. Here's the long game. If the fighting stops tomorrow, the world will rush in to build up Ukraine, right? Companies, countries, everybody want to be part of the Ukraine rebuilding project.
Revival.
And within 5 years, Ukraine would be thoroughly integrated into the European economy and probably into European security as a result. Meanwhile, fast forward 5 years after the fighting stops in Russia, what happens? Isolated, international pariah, nothing to sell, and on my plan of energy independence again, Russia's broke.
Is a peace deal or a ceasefire doable? I mean, what I've seen so far is coming from the Biden administration. They don't seem to want to be the ones leading this effort. Should the U.S. be leading this effort to bring the 2 countries to the table?
Well, the United States has an enormous amount of leverage here. Obviously, we have leverage over Russia if we would only restart American energy. But we also have a lot of leverage over Ukraine. We're the country that is supplying Ukraine and keeping Ukraine alive. The Europeans are as well, but it's really the United States taking the lead. I'm not saying stop supplying Ukraine. Let them go. I mean, give them whatever they need. But also to say, look, the aid we're giving you is not unconditional. And it's not forever. And we're not going to keep letting you have this pipe dream of unilateral, unconditional surrender on the part of Russia. Why? Because that's risky for us.
Let me ask you, though, we know Ukraine has applied to become a member of NATO. How will that all basically evolve? Because I know obviously a lot of these NATO members are very worried that this could escalate the war.
Yeah, I was interested in that because the countries that came out in support of that were not the main European countries. You didn't see Germany, right. You didn't see France, you didn't see Britain, you didn't see us say, oh, this is a great idea. It's a terrible idea for Ukraine to join NATO right now. Why? Because once it's a member of NATO, all of a sudden the Ukraine-Russia war becomes a NATO-Russian war.
So then, KT, where does it go from here? I mean, we're thinking, you know, we've seen the Ukrainian troops are overrunning these Russian forces. They've obviously seemed to have really made a lot more progress than anticipated. Mm-hmm. We've seen, for example, between the help from the British forces and the NATO forces as well, to be able to come up with strategic plans to, you know, deal with and push back on Russian occupation. Do you think there could be a resolution? And if so, when and basically how quickly?
Well, it really depends on whether the Biden administration is encouraging and going along with the Ukrainian idea of unconditional surrender on the part of the Russians. I mean, the Ukrainian president has said, well, we're not going to stop until we get it all back. We're not going to stop till we get Crimea back. Maybe that's a negotiating position on his part, but maybe he means it. I mean, I just think, you know, here's the problem. How many children do you have, Mercedes?
5. Okay. Like you, right?
I have 5 as well. But you can't cope with problems of all 5 at the same time, right?
Oh, no.
Okay. You want to kind of make sure that, you know, you have 1 or 2, but the other ones are quiet. Right now, right. America's biggest strategic challenge is China. In the long-term strategic, China wants to replace us as the leader of the world. They want to rewrite the rules of the world. Russia is a problem too. Absolutely. And Russia and China together are a really big problem. But the Ukraine war, I'm all for finding a way to just, as I said, buy some time, buy peace, and then buy time, and then have it solved economically. I don't know how this ends militarily. I don't see it ending in anything. Well, it could end in a stalemate, but that doesn't get anybody to any advantage, or it could end in an escalation. Vladimir Putin will escalate before he walks away in an unconditional surrender. Mm.
Well, scary times, KT McFarland, but we always enjoy your insight. And we have some great news. You're going to be joining the CPAC Now family with your own show that will be launching soon. Tell us about what you're thinking and tell us about the show.
Well, it's we're not sure of the name. We might call it DEFCON 3 by KT, Defense Condition 3 by KT. But what it will be is an opportunity for me to talk to thought leaders and people who are experts in the field of national security, economic security, energy security, and to sort of have a deep dive in it. What we've seen in the last couple of months is that there's much more interest now. There's Russia, Ukraine, there's China, Taiwan, there's now North Korea and nuclear weapons, and a lot of people who are primarily concerned with pocketbook issues, as they should be, but they're also concerned with, this seems to be a really much more dangerous world than it was a couple of years ago. And so it's a good opportunity for me to use my connections, frankly, and get people who normally don't go and do a lot of interviewing to have their thoughts and to present them to our conservative people at CPAC.
Well, our goal is to bring a lot of information and good education and great analysis and insight from the experts to all of our supporters, not only here in America, but across the globe. Matt just got back from CPAC Australia. He's heading to CPAC Japan in December. Oh, we've got CPAC Mexico in November. So lots going on internationally. And I think the message that we keep hearing from these other countries, KT, is that they're dealing with a lot of the same issues that we're dealing here in America, whether it's the economic issues or the cultural issues. Mm-hmm. It's all a lot of the same situations, and everyone's looking for the best advice, the best practices in order to be able to win elections and get conservatives back in power.
You know, all around the world, I think countries around the world and people in the United States, we're hungry for leadership, for people with principles, with people with integrity, people who aren't just out to make a buck for themselves, but have a sense of the greater good, not only for their fellow Americans, but for the world. That's why if people in our country aren't leading, if our political leaders aren't leading, if the people in the White House aren't leading, CPAC's going to lead. And good for us.
Good for us. And thank you, KT. We always appreciate your insight. And we look forward to getting this show launched. So we'll keep you posted on the launch date.